here for Rise of the Bots, and I'm going to first turn it over to Mohammad and David to introduce themselves. Mohammad, tell us about yourself and how your company fits into the Rise of the Bots model.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Mohammad Rashid. I work with Tavant, which is about a 22-year-old startup. We focus on both products and services, completely focused on the mortgage industry. We've been working in this industry for 2 decades, trying to innovate as much as we can. I'm focused on the touchless lending part of Tavant, the products and strategy side. Touchless lending is something that Sandeep talked about earlier in the day, if you were at his session. So we're giving birth to bots for underwriters, if you want to call it that.
Great. David?
Hi, I'm David Karandish, CEO and co-founder of Capacity. First of all, I just want to thank you all for being here. This is the BAP before alcohol panel. So I know we're the last stop before drinks, so I always appreciate good attendance for something like that. Quick story on Capacity. Capacity is a support automation platform specifically tailored for the mortgage space. I'm super excited to share with you what we're up to.
Great, thank you. And I'm Greg McElroy from AmeriHome Mortgage. I run the correspondent lending operations. We're a correspondent investor. All right, so let's get started here then. So when we're talking about bots, are we talking about process-driven workflows? Are we talking about event-based workflows? Are we talking about, or does the bot robotic process automation mean something different to you? David, you want to start?
Yes, so I'd like to use, the answer to that is yes. I'd like to use a little analogy. If you think of your favorite restaurant, right? You've got your front of your restaurant where you've got your steak dinner, your wine pairing, your appetizer, maybe a little bourbon. Any bourbon lovers in the house here? Oh, a few. Think of that as your chatbot. This is your front-end experience that either your borrowers are spending time with or your team is spending time with. So this is kind of the front of the house. That's the chat experience, that's the AI, that's the server coming to you and anticipating your needs before you ask them a question. In the back of the kitchen, where the sausage is made, that's where your workflows are. This could be anything from a workflow for intelligently comparing documents, so you don't have to hire a team of 20-somethings to stare and compare between your title and your system of record. This could be an onboarding workflow for getting new team members up to speed and productive. But it's really any back-end process that you don't really want people to have to see the innards of, that happens behind the scenes and executes flawlessly. And then the last is, if you think of the bussers, they're the kind of the unsung heroes of the restaurant. They kind of go back and forth between the kitchen and the front of the restaurant. These are a lot of your RPA workers. These are the folks that are doing a process over and over again. There can be a little bit of intelligence in there in terms of what to do. Don't clear the table, even though it looks like most of the people have gotten up, sort of thing. This could be logging into important websites and grabbing information. They kind of sit, in my view, in between the chatbot on the front end and the workflows on the back end.
Excellent, great. Mohammad?
Yeah, so when we first started doing, if you look at RPA is not necessarily equal to bots, but it is one way, one methodology of developing bots for your organization. When RPA first started, basically the idea was you could take a non-technical person and have them develop bots that replaced humans, and specifically the repetitive tasks, right? Things that are highly human-oriented, is highly manual, but it repeats itself over and over in your organization. We'll talk about use cases, but I want to put this one out first. We looked under the hood of a correspondent lender, and there was a specific person, a lady called Maria. She would basically open up the LOS, take numbers out of there, plug it into a website that is, you only have credentials to log in, FHA, VA, you go into and get the insurance certificates, you copy and paste numbers from there, put it into the LOS again, and that is what she was doing over and over and over. The idea of RPA was basically, okay, let's optimize that, let's remove that human part of the operation. It has come a long way. This was 6, 7 years ago when RPA first started. Again, it's not necessarily the only way to do bots, but it has taken off in the industry to a degree. And nowadays, you actually hear about hyper-automation. Now, every time I hear the word hyper tied to something, I get hypertension. But, you get hyper-automation. What do you really mean by that? So Gartner came up with it in 2021. I think it was one of the top technology trends in the industry. And what they meant by it is automate everything that you can automate, but when it really came down to the nitty-gritty on the ground, it meant tie in RPA with AI and machine learning, with a ability to do intelligent document processing, so that you have a higher skill set for the bot to kind of address the problem. So you might see, now in mortgage conferences, you will see a lot of vendors that have hyper-automation there. Now you know what it is. The reality on the ground is anywhere from automating receipt of a attachment, a file attachment in email, automating that, to bots that do underwriting, things that we're attacking.
That's great. Intro to automation is better for our speed, and we'll ramp up to the hyper automation. All right, well, that's good. I think that's a great foundation. It gives you an idea where we might be coming from. So one of the things I always worry about, what's the real world application for me? So you mentioned the FHA, VA, and going onto the website and doing something very repetitive. I'm sure there's a lot of that opportunity, but can you give us some real world examples from the mortgage space, or maybe something not from the mortgage space that might apply to the mortgage space as you go? You want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll do a few. So the first time I stared into the belly of the beast, it's the first time I ever looked at the Fannie Mae guidelines. And if you look at that 2,000-page document of doom, you wonder how any mortgage closes in the United States, right? So we have spent a lot of time working with the big agencies to be able to automate answering questions into those guidelines. So if you think about automating your underwriting desk, that's a big part of what Capacity does. But on top of that, we know that a lot of folks have overlays. They have their own policies and procedures. They have their own spin on things where they can't always just rely on what the agencies come back with. That's where Capacity can come in, answer those questions, and continue learning and growing. When I think about the difference between AI and automation, I think of automation as taking a process and then having that process being done by some kind of bot or technology behind the scenes. I think of AI as really software that learns and is improving over time. When we launched about 5 years ago, we were answering roughly 55% of questions from our clients, both internal team member questions as well as external borrower-facing questions. I just checked the stat recently. We're just over 90.4%. So 9 out of 10 questions, the bot's handling. 1 out of 10, it'll escalate up. Another good use case that we see involves your onboarding and training. So that could be onboarding a new client. This could be onboarding a new loan officer. Anywhere where you have a process where you're doing a lot of repetitive work, it's a good place for this kind of tech.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I would not necessarily have thought it for an internal solution as well. I think that was a great example. Mohammad?
Yeah, so a couple that come to mind is, eons ago when we had the refi boom, you always had to go through and validate the homeowners and insurance, right? That the data on the homeowner's insurance certificate that was issued by the insurance carrier had the right data from your system of record. Who used to do those checks? It's humans in the loop, sitting in the back, receiving these email attachments from the insurance carriers. They open it up. Oh, it's an insurance carrier certificate. Let's open up the LOS. Let's do the compare and stares and compares with documents and the data. And if it didn't match up for whatever reason, then let's send off another email to the insurance carrier asking them to change. And then the cycle repeats itself. That's a perfect example of what you can do with bots, right? Another would be relevant to you if you guys are doing MI best execution. There are 6 MI companies. You get a rate quote. Potentially you're working with all 6 or a subset of them. Who's doing get the rate quote from each of these, right? It's probably not your LOS, or it's not smart enough to do all 6. And so somebody's sitting there and saying, okay, let's open up the website, type in the data, and let's see what the rate quote comes back. Well, what about a bot that does that for you, right? All 6 MI companies, rate quotes come back, you choose between the lowest or diversified risk, and you select the quote that you want. There's many of these, right? Small tidbits of human interaction that happens in the back of a lender. That's very important nowadays, especially where we are in thin margins, to look at, understand, tease out, work on. One of the largest ones, and this is maybe a toot the horn moment for me, it's underwriting, right? It's processing and underwriting, a huge time sink. So what can be done in terms of services, what can be done in terms of automation for what an underwriter performs, right? So I have document analysis, stares and compares. I have credit analysis, collateral analysis, title, fraud, asset, you name it. They are doing this work with typically documents from an LOS. A lot of human compares and stares and compares, right? A lot of human manual activity. There's a lot of work that can be done to streamline that and automate that, and that's kind of the work that we're doing on the touchless lending side.
Well, and just to add to that, the problem with stare and compare, it's the last rhyming word. It's stare, compare, and despair. Mm-hmm. And the reason for the despair is that most of these documents don't need to be looked at by a person. You need people to handle the exceptions, the things that are off kilter, but manually having some human look at every single document when most of them are okay, it's just not a great use of resources. It burns people out, and it's a very despairing process for the amount of staff you have to assign to something like that. The basic idea is you have the technology come in, tech does the stare and compare, so your team doesn't have to. When there are exceptions, raise that up, have a human get involved, but otherwise, let the machine learning go do its thing.
Excellent, those are great examples. You have something else?
I have one observation that maybe it's better to address right now, which is something that I think Bill Dallas can address, or not even Bill. I think it was the first guy who spoke on the panel here was Apple, right? He said that you're working in this human condition. You're given these walls, and you kind of are walking within those walls. You're not trying to hit the 2 walls. What happens when we do these robotic process automation stuff and we automate the email that comes in as an attachment? We automate the fact that we can do FHA VA through an API, and we go through a robotic process automate and log in through a robot, is we kind of not force that innovation to happen. Right? We are adapting to what is there in reality, and we're not really resisting, right? We're not innovating that side of the equation. Why have email attachments come in through an email, right? Or attachments come in through an email? Why not have FHA, VA provide us with APIs, right? That's the push that we should be making, and not kind of accepting what's out there and adopting or adapting through robotic process automation. I think that's the other edge, the negative edge of this is because we're automating, we have a tool that automates it. We kind of put it under the covers and it kind of goes away, but it's really something that we should digitize and innovate and really push the other side, the other party to come to the table.
Right, and I think more and more, as you mentioned, there's so many sources of data that you can pull in now from Fannie, Freddie, vendors all over the place. So it certainly lends itself to that type of a solution. So let's think about it for a minute then. If someone wants to get started here, right, using the tools from either of your companies, how does that work? What would be your process you recommend to them? How do they decide where to start?
I can kick off. We typically start out by doing a collaborative session with our prospects and clients where we talk through what are the key areas you want to go automate. Is it borrower facing? Let's go get a bot on your website to help with lead gen, help with first-time home buyer questions, something we can go get a quick W win in the first 30 days. Is it internal, onboarding, training, automating your intranet, right? I was telling somebody earlier today, I heard someone refer to SharePoint as SharePointless and share file as share file not found. If we can help, like just to help you get access to the information you need, it's a really good place to start. From there, we map out what are the next sets of workflows to go knock out. We might not automate the entire underwriting process in one bit, but let's start with a piece of it, and then keep adding on from there.
Yeah, laying the framework, laying the foundation and building on top of that. That's how you expanded, I think, in your other example that you were giving us, got it up to the high 90s. That's great. Mohammad, anything from you on that?
Yeah, I just realized I did a Trump moment. I called Steve Jobs Apple. This is what happens when you're on stage. So what do you do when you look at the overall workflow? I feel there's three steps, a very easy 3 steps to kind of consume what you have out there from a robotics perspective, right? Whether it's RPA or other types of robots that you can write yourself. Do a proof of concept, right? The first of it is understand what is out there. Choose a few examples that seem low-hanging fruits. Gather a team together. Look at the tools that are out there, and attack that problem, right? Build it. Deploy it. It doesn't have to be right the first time. You get to feel the contours of what is the challenge that you're taking on, the capability within your company. Do you have the right talent? Look at the tools that are out there and what they provide out of the box, and achieve that goal, right? Automate anything, automate something. And then from there, once you've proven it to yourself and you know that there is some ROI, take it to a build approach. So build a foundation, build a governance model, right? Once you have an automated process, you don't want people to go back to the manual process, right? If you let it go, people may just go back to stares and compares. People may go back to push that button for, ordering flood. But if you put your foot down and have a governance model and say, no, that route is not available to you anymore, the automation is going to persist. That's a governance model that you have to put in place. So there's these foundations of frameworks, foundations, governance models that you should put in. And finally, once you've done a couple of these, scale out, right? Look at all the humans in the loop that you have in the back. Identify, prioritize, figure out which ones work, which ones are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck. If I remove this underwriter who is doing a stare and compare, that is probably a bigger dollar amount that you can save than if it's a processor doing a stare and compare. So be judicious in what you choose to kind of put into your backlog of stories.
Yeah, that's great. I know at AmeriHome we always focus on, where do you start? We always focus on the things that either cost us the most money, most time involved with it, what's the most manual process, or collectively between us and our client, what causes the most rework, right? I know that's where we started. I know it was said earlier in the sessions today, but to better, faster, cheaper is how we live and going through these things. All right, so let's talk a little bit then moving towards cost, right? So I would imagine you've been doing this for a while. One mortgage company may be slightly different than the next, but processes are basically the same. Maybe the LOS is different. So there's a couple of different things there. So talk about cost structure there. So do you have things already canned on the shelf that you can plug and play because you said out of the box a moment ago, right? Or how often does it take custom integration and implementation or programming to get something working for an individual mortgage origination company?
Yeah, maybe I'll start out here. So we've been at this for a little over 5 years. We've raised $62 million, which is pretty healthy as a Midwestern startup. But part of what we've supported is our developer platform. Our developer platform has allowed us to build out integrations with over 110 different apps out of the box, anything from Encompass and Velocify to CRMs like HubSpot and Salesforce. So what that means is that when we work with a client on getting them started, we've got a quick start package. It's very easy to deploy. We need a couple API keys to get started, and then we're off to the races. Now, every single client has, when they get started, they're like, oh, could you add this app? Oh, yeah, we forgot about this other app that we use every single day. Could you add that one on as well? And so the way that we've designed our developer platform is you can hook up your API to our API, and get capacity or get that app capacitized in a pretty short period of time. Another thing that we've seen, particularly for kind of mid-sized firms on up, is we've had folks come to us and they're like, David, this is great, but man, 3 years ago we started an internal data project and we put a bunch of this stuff in a database somewhere, and I don't have a team to go build an API in front of that. We actually have a little part of the platform where you can put a piece of code in front of your database and now ask natural language questions into your SQL database. Most people don't. I speak a little bit of SQL with my nerd cred, but most people don't walk around thinking in select queries. So we try to let people be people and let bots be bots, and that's one of the ways we tackle that.
So we are a services and products company. So if you are building a bot, we can definitely help you with that. Can bring in the best practices, the governance models, et cetera, that we just talked about. And that would be a fixed price kind of an engagement. On the product side, we have a little bit of a different approach. We're looking at an API store approach. So we are really focused on processing and underwriting. And so we have services that provide document analysis, credit analysis, collateral, asset, title, fraud. And those are a set of services that you as a lender can consume. So we help you tie in the glue code that ties it in to your LOS, to your POS, so that the full workflow is automated, right? So you don't have anybody pushing any buttons. You don't have anybody searching for documents in the e-folder of Encompass, if you're using Encompass. Those API stores basically give you the lift, right? So we have what you might want to call as a bot as a service. So these are a set of bots that are available for you to tie into, and pretty much the price point there is a per transaction fee depending on volume tiers or complexity tiers. By the way, just as an aside, one of the LOSs ironically has bot in its name, and there are actually bots out there that are trying to inject data into that bot because it doesn't have APIs, or it didn't have APIs at one time. I'm sure you guys don't use it or you don't know about it, but I wanted to mention it.
The only other thing I'll add to that is, if you ask me, David, looking at the history of technology, how is this stuff changing over time? One of the biggest changes we've seen is that with a workflow platform powering your org, you go from coding your next great workflow to configuring it. And what I mean by that is, instead of having a team to go develop out some custom software for you that is hard to change, hard to update, hard to improve, with a kind of low-code, no-code workflow, you as a non-developer can go in and configure what your say your comparison workflow looks like against your mortgage, or your onboarding workflow looks like for your HR team. The reason that that's so wonderful and special is that we've kind of taken the power out of the hands of your IT team, which is already strained, already limited, and we've said, we're going to give you, the business side, the ability to dictate how your processes are automated, what that looks like, and the ability even to, like those Russian dolls with the doll within the doll within the doll sort of thing. Maybe you shouldn't be making Russian jokes right now. But the ability to actually embed a workflow in another workflow, in another workflow, where you can kind of chunk it up into individual pieces so that you can own what those outcomes look like without having to rely on an IT team to take the ball and carry it for you.
Thanks. So you mentioned per transaction, right? So I think I've seen other models where it's either you pay a one-time fee for a bot or something to be programmed in that saves your process a bit, or it could be a licensing fee, a one-time fee with a licensing fee for a year or something. Is that kind of how both of your models might work?
Yeah, so we typically do an annual subscription fee based on which parts of the platform you use. And we've got very entry-level, easy to bring on starter packages all the way up to give me all the things and all the integrations and go from there. One of the interesting shifts we've seen is that more and more of our clients are coming to us saying, David, we're hiring you not out of our tech budget, but out of our hiring budget. for the cost to bring on another team member or two, we're going to actually hire capacity as the bot and have the bot start taking over these actions.
That's pretty much the models that you mentioned, which is kind of looking at what bots you want to automate. If it's something that you want to own, an IP that you want to own, we will basically build it for you, and you own it, and you have no transaction costs. But in the bots as a service, where you have bots available in the library and you want to tie it in, it's usually a per transaction play. And we can figure out, based on volume and complexity, what makes sense to kind of charge for that.
Excellent. Well, thanks. I think that was a lot of great information. So maybe a little shameless plug time, right? So maybe each of you can tell us, what are you excited about that your company offers, and what's new on the horizon that we could look forward to.
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
On the touchless lending side, I think we have like 3 summits that we want to climb. First summit is to get to a straight-through processing and automated underwriting, basically to a clear-to-close. So remove all the stairs and compares, remove the rivers of paper that go through every loan, and create a digital loan object that you can take downstream. So that's the target for Summit 1, is get to a clear-to-close. Summit 2, which is immediately thereafter, is get to a closed funded loan. So take all the pre-closing, post-closing funding, post-QA, QC, all that manual work and humans in the loop activity out to get to a straight-through processing to a closed funded loan. And eventually, Summit 3 for us is kind of expand out to and diversify to other types of loans. So mortgage is the hard nut to crack, and we're basically focused completely on doing that. Summit 1, Summit 2 achieves that. Summit 3 is basically saying, well, if you want to do HELOCs, if you want to do installment loans, if you want to do auto students, whatever, all those will become automated and straight-through processing and without the human, oriented touch involved. So it's a very clear-cut vision for us. We're attempting to achieve it this year, literally this year. So Q2, Q3, we will have achieved Summit 2. End of this year, Q4, we'll achieve Summit 3, and basically get a full system out there that does automated loans.
The number one feature I'm excited about is something I happen to name. We call it the Email Interceptor. Now, the marketing team doesn't let me join the product naming discussions because they thought that was very robotic, Email Interceptor. But the concept is really what's most important here. Basic idea is, think about most support desks. Could be underwriting help desk, could be your HR help desk, could be your IT desk. Step 1, you got this big email inbox. Everyone's in there clamoring to respond to things. It's a mess. A lot of companies like that today. Step 2, I email support, and we're going to create a ticket. We're going to provide some transparency. We're going to provide some visibility. We're going to provide some background data around what's happening. A little bit better. Step 3 is where things get interesting. So this Email Interceptor jumps in. I email support. Yes, it'll create the ticket, but the bot is going to jump right into our conversation, intercept that conversation, and send responses back to me based on what the AI thinks I meant by my email. If I thumb that question up, we auto-close that ticket. And now that is off your support team from having to deal with. Step 4, I email the support box. It doesn't create the ticket. The bot responds back to me. And if I thumb down that response, then it creates the ticket. So the basic idea is we are trying to do everything we can to help your team do its best work by automating your support, jumping right into that email channel. When you combine that with plugging the bot in your Microsoft Teams implementation, your Slack implementation, your SharePoint, anywhere else where you tend to get a lot of questions, we're pretty excited about what we've been able to do. Our first clients that have implemented this, they're like, where have you been all my life?
That's great. All right, well, wrapping up here. I would just say, this is, as you can hear, it chips away at what your cost structure is, whatever process that you're looking at. And think about if you've got a 20-minute collective actual hands-on work time, you implement something that saves you a minute, you've just saved 5% on your process, multiply that by the number of loans you're doing any given period, and you got a good start for your ROI. David, Mohammad, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here, and thanks all for attending.
Hey, thanks for having us.